Do you like people who only like to talk about themselves? Yeah, neither do I. But guess who we're going to talk about today? People fixated on themselves. It'll be fun, I promise. Since March, we've covered the board imbalance controversy at TSHA, and since May, the ongoing legal battle initiated by Mr. J.P. Bryan to restore the balance required by the bylaws. The legal issue there is the bylaws and compliance with them. They are not by suggestions, they are by laws. The practical issue is why the bylaws call for balance on the board in the first place. A balance between those in the academy and those outside it means a balance of viewpoints and knowledge presented by the association and used in running the association. When the May 31st hearing did not fall in their favor, those of the academy pivoted to every other thing you can imagine. The real reason for the lawsuit is politics. The real reason for the lawsuit is J.P. Bryan hates professional historians. The real reason for the lawsuit is racism. Predictable, right? They initially put out a good old boy network narrative suggesting that Mr. Bryan bought the judge, but public records of campaign contributions quickly disproved that theory. And then there was the conspiracy theory that a secret cabal consisting of myself, Mr. Bryan, and 6 and sometimes 12 other unnamed souls have been orchestrating a hostile takeover of TSHA behind the scenes for years. Yes, I'm serious. Their next position about the lawsuit was that Mr. Bryan hates all scholars and wants to rid TSHA of historians entirely, and, of course, that TSHA can't possibly go on without them. That is, can't go on without this specific vocal group of scholars. And to demonstrate their value, some of these self-styled progressive historians composed essays about how important they are as scholars and to the organization. Some of these crusaders admit they aren't even members of TSHA because it isn't academic-centric enough for them. So they'll contribute a 1,000-word essay about themselves, but won't contribute $35 for a membership. Go figure. Now, because these folks desire to make a name for themselves as activists, we are not sharing their names here. Our purpose is simply to illustrate how they view themselves in relation to the association and to the public. The first essay is titled, "It Takes More," and is probably the most honest of the bunch. Of the so-called progressive historians, the writer says, quote, "The TSHA can't operate as it currently does without this group of progressive academic historians participating as they usually do," close quote. Now, considering how the TSHA keeps falling into financial straits and has lost a significant amount of public support, I would argue that perhaps TSHA operating as it currently does is not a good idea and is not a sustainable way to operate. And then this retired historian tells you what he thinks of me and you. Quote, "So it doesn't matter to me if 2,000 people are expressing their support for J.P. Bryan. Let those 2,000 happy and satisfied folks write all the scholarly articles, do the book reviews, etc., 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 and do it with high scholarly and historiographical quality." So what the author of this essay forgets is that there are plenty of credentialed, well-qualified historians out there who were excised from the organization for not following the new mandatory focus on race and gender, power and oppression. There are still professional historians who are not activists. As such, they aren't the right kind of people for the so-called progressives. So remember, it doesn't matter to this retired professor if you support Mr. Bryan's quest for balance and a genuinely inclusive history produced by historians without a political axe to grind. All that matters to him is that activist scholars control the academic output. He illustrates so well why balance is necessary in the organization. In another professor's writing on the subject, we see the my way or the highway approach. Of those who disagree with activist historians, he says that, quote, True history to them evidently consists of clinging to the white supremacy and myths that have traditionally passed for history in this state, end quote. Even more hyperbolic, quote, J.P. Bryan and his compatriots clearly want to return to Anna Pennybaker's historical narrative of Texas, end quote. So, if you don't agree with the activist historians, you want to return to 1888. Can you feel the nuance, people? I can. And of course, he has to talk about himself and how he's overcome his whiteness. Quote, I am not anti-white. I myself am the very embodiment of whiteness. I grew up on stories of the Lost Cause and Fess Parker as Davy Crockett, going to the state capitol, the Alamo, and San Jacinto, and yet, personal growth is possible. The recognition that your experience is not representative of everyone around you is possible. The agonizing process of coming to grips with oneself as a historical creation is possible, even necessary, end quote. This is why balance is necessary. If you need a minute to take a personal growth break, pause this video, do the work, then come on back. The next one is a gem. Quote, I am a former college professor and trained historian. To the executive director of TSHA, an oil billionaire named J.P. Bryan, that makes me an elite. Here's who I really am. Okay. So this trained historian and several others like him who've made this same claim need a basic vocabulary lesson. Nobody regards you as an elite in the classist sense. Nobody assumes you come from a financially privileged background. You are not an elite, you are an elitist. One who believes you're superior because of education, wealth, or whatever. In your case, education. So anyway, after some biographical description to demonstrate that he's not of the elite, he tells us how much his minority students loved him, and he quotes from reviews that they've left him online. In the more than 1,000-word essay, he just carpet bombs all the required jargon. Racist, whitewashed, ethnic cleansing, genocide, tragedy, injustice, all the things near and dear to his activist heart. And then more glowing reviews from his former students. He is, by the way, of the Howard Zinn mold and thinks the publications of TSHA should focus even more on resistance to oppression. And TSHA needs to focus more on the needs of academics. Hey, maybe then he'd actually join. This is why we need balance. The next one begins, quote, I do not know half of the history that makes me, and perhaps I never will, end quote. Okay, then she talks about her family and how the history of her indigenous side of the family has been intentionally erased and that her Spanish ancestors eradicated her native ancestors, and this is her truth. Then we move from self-absorption to catastrophizing, quote, rectifying the TSHA as J.P. Bryan intends to do only guarantees the erasure of people like me, end quote. So restoring balance to a nonprofit board will erase people? A variety of viewpoints will erase people? Scholars who equate viewpoint diversity to the eradication of themselves is why there has to be balance. She continues, I fully support challenging Mr. Bryan and his narrative because it allows me and people like me to expand our presence temporally. My stance invites Texas Mexicans and indigenous peoples of these lands to end our erasure, to uplift our existence in this region, end quote. Yeah, so no, nobody wants to do anything to your identity or your temporal presence or your uplift. There needs to be balance between people who are obsessed with identity and people who are not. There is room in TSHA for people who study South Texas identity formations via the grapefruit, such as this scholar does, and people who do not. And yes, the grapefruit thing is real. One may argue that there are more intelligent ways to phrase the study of generations of proud citrus growers in the Rio Grande Valley, but then one might be pilloried for not using the word identity. In addition to the essays, a letter was published signed by 10 former TSHA presidents opposing the lawsuit, and it just so happens that all the signatories were academics. Over on Twitter, one of the activist historians got the attention of a Texas Monthly reporter who had interviewed Mr. Bryan in 2015 about his new museum. On Twitter, the reporter mentioned to our activist that Mr. Bryan had made some negative comments about then President Barack Obama during the interview. Now, if you're like me, right now you're wondering what in the hell that has to do with TSHA. Well, our activist historian cites this as proof of Mr. Bryan's, quote, commitment to white supremacy. I wish that I were joking. The resulting Texas Monthly article was short, but interesting. The gist of it was that because Mr. Bryan expressed certain opinions in 2015 about President Obama, none of which had to do with race, he is unfit to be executive director of a historical association. I was interviewed for that article, and I'm pretty sure you can guess what my perspective was. A former GLO employee trained as a museum professional has referred to the Bryan Museum as a vanity project. Clearly, she doesn't have the benefit of the knowledge that all of the exhibit information in the whole place was prepared by professional historians. The activist professor class think they are above criticism and should be allowed the sole viewpoint in the Texas State Historical Association. They don't care that non-activist historians are capable of filling any void they may create if they're absent, and they've made it abundantly clear that they don't care what you or I think. The home folk, in other words, should pay their membership dues and shut the hell up. So the reaction to the May hearing was mixed. It was a mix of activists talking about themselves as the sole saviors of minority history and spewing invective at their critics. Their words demonstrate better than anything I could ever write exactly why balance is vital in an organization that disseminates Texas history. Despite all their wish-casting, catastrophizing, and name-calling, they can't overcome the only obstacle that matters, that the board is not in balance and must be balanced before the board can meet. By writing thousands of words about how they view Mr. Bryan as a threat to activist history, they show why they sought a board majority in the first place. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why our historical organizations, all of them, need balance. This fight has shown us who and where the activist historians are, and that's a net good from where I sit. That's useful information. Until next time, God in Texas, y'all.